Hey people, back in your faces again this week. Let's talk about the employment contract types in Australia. But let me begin this with a personal story. Some of you would have heard me narrate the experience of getting my first ever social work job while I was completing my master's program. So I hadn't even finished my studies when I got that job. I still had like 2 more months to go on my master's before graduation when I landed that job. Now, I accepted that job on a casual basis because obviously I was still on a student visa at that time, and you know all the restrictions on how many hours you can work. So there was no way I could do full-time hours, and that was why I took the job as a casual employee. Then when I finished my studies, I went through the whole process of applying for my post-study visa and subsequently my permanent residency visa. So several months down the track, this organization offered me a permanent position and I declined. No, I did not want a permanent position. I choose to remain on the casual contract, and I am going to tell you why. Stick around, okay? My name is Chioma. Welcome to my channel, especially if you're new here and you have never seen me before. I am so happy you stopped by, okay? What I want you to do now is to sit down somewhere comfortable and make yourself a part of this family by subscribing. Let's get started. In this video, I want to talk about employment contract types here in Australia. And this video is going to be part 1 of a series of 3 videos, hopefully, that will cover employment contract types, how taxes work in Australia, and beyond that, I have a bonus video. Okay, so the third video is a bonus video where I want to share something. It's not a secret, okay, but a lot of people do not know about this. I want to share how you can reduce the tax you pay on your income here in Australia through something called salary sacrificing or salary packaging. Okay, so that would be the third video. Obviously, we're starting with employment contract types in this video, and I want you to stick around for all 3 of those videos. They will be dropping one after the other every week. The 3 main contract types would be full-time employment, part-time employment, and then casual employment, right? So full-time employment, I don't believe requires a lot of explanation. It just means working full-time. So what a lot of people assume to be working full-time is working Monday to Friday. Here in Australia, full-time hours equal 35 hours a week minimum, up to 40 hours a week of work. So that is what constitutes full-time employment. Anything that falls short of 35 hours a week minimum is considered part-time employment. So keep in mind that it's not so much a function of how many days a week you work, but how many hours you work, because some full-time staff complete their 35 hours in 4 days. They are still considered full-time staff. In the same vein, a part-time staff could decide to spread out their hours across 5 days a week, and so they are going to work every single day of the week. It still does not make them a full-time employee if they are not working up to a total of at least 35 hours a week. So that's one key difference between full-time and part-time here in Australia. So full-time and part-time employees could be on a permanent contract, which means that their employment is on a continuing basis. There's not a specific end date for them, or the end date is ridiculously far into the future, okay? Do you know, I had a look at my employment contract the other day, and I saw that the effective end date, I am a continuing staff, the effective end date is sometime in 2090 something. God, please keep me alive by then. Yeah, but I digress. On a full-time contract or a part-time contract, you could be employed on a permanent and continuing basis, or you could be on a fixed term contract. A fixed term contract just means that your employment starts on a specific date and ends on a specific date. Now let's move into the casual contract. A casual contract is not determined by how many hours you work. So there is no set amount for how many hours you should work on a casual contract. And it means that your work will be dependent on availability. If work is available, then you could be offered that work. And also, if you're offered that work and you do not feel like doing it, you're under no obligation to do it as a casual worker, okay? So you have more flexibility to choose your hours of work, to accept or not to accept the work that is offered to you. That is the key difference. However, when you look a little closer into the entitlements, allowances, and benefits for each of these contract types, that is where you would see a lot more of the distinguishing features between each of the contract types. Let's begin with full-time and part-time on a continuing basis or on a permanent basis. Okay, so these guys would be entitled to paid leave, paid annual leave, paid parental leave, paid personal leave. So personal leave covers sick leave as well, right? And then on a permanent contract, you also have the obligation to provide notice if you wanted to quit your job. So your organization might have a rule around how much notice you should give, 4 weeks, 2 weeks, depending on the organization, right? But all of these do not apply to casual employees. Casual employees are not entitled to paid leave because their job is not centered around a set number of weeks or a set number of hours that they must work. Okay, they only work on an availability basis, which means that they only get paid for the hours that they work, which is not the case for permanent staff, okay? Their contract comes with a set number of days, a set number of hours built into their contract, which means that if they are away from work on the basis of being sick, or if they wanted to take annual leave to go vacationing, they will still get paid. For the casual worker, it is not the same. If they don't work, they don't get paid. In relation to giving notice or receiving notice if an employee was going to quit or if they were going to be fired, right? For casual employees, that doesn't really matter. A casual employee can decide that they don't want a job anymore and they are not required to give notice. Of course, still be a decent human being and tell your employer in advance that you want to quit. Okay, you don't want to be burning bridges just because you're a casual employee. You might still need the same employer to provide a reference for your next job. So please be a decent human being about it. But what I am saying is that the law does not require you to give notice before you quit. On the flip side of things, if things were to go south with your organization and unfortunately redundancies happen, in the case of full-time staff and part-time staff, they are entitled to redundancy pay. That also does not apply to casual workers. So casual workers will not be paid anything. They can be let go at any time. So even if it were not in relation to a redundancy, your employer as a casual staff could let you go at any time without giving you notice. Those are some of the key differences between permanent contracts and the casual contracts. So what is this big thing about casual workers being paid more than permanent workers on a part-time contract or a full-time contract? Come closer. There is something called a 25% leave loading that applies to casual staff. So the 25% leave loading, in my understanding, is sort of like a compensatory payment to mitigate any financial impacts as a result of loss of income when a casual worker is sick or needs to be away from work for whatever reason. And that is why casuals are paid higher. Let me go back to the story about how I was offered a permanent contract and I declined. When I was offered that contract, lots of things were happening in the background. I mean, in relation to our domestic situation. It was a transitionary phase for us. I had just finished my studies and I was becoming more settled into life after school. My husband at that time was either about to start his first job or was about to quit that first job to start his business. And then the kids had also grown a little older to the point where one of them had started school and the other one was very close behind to start school as well. So lots of things were happening in relation to care arrangements for the kids because now it meant that we couldn't have both kids in one place under the same care arrangement. One person was in school, the other person had to be looked after somewhere else. And at that time, it wasn't feasible for me to take up full-time permanent employment because it is quite rigid in hours and rigid in how many days I needed to be at work. And that was why I chose to remain on a casual contract. And let's not also forget that the 25% loading meant that I was getting more on my pay than my colleagues who were on full-time or part-time contracts but were on a permanent basis. Yeah. So yeah, that's the big thing about casual employment. I feel like if for you it comes down to flexibility, then consider casual employment. I was lucky enough to be in an organization where I never had to worry about not having an available shift to work from day to day, from week to week. No, because this particular job was a high traffic job. Yeah, it required as many hands on deck as possible. So I always had work. I was the one turning down shifts. And that's the beautiful thing about casual work. The fact that you can choose your hours, you can choose your days, but on top of it, you're getting the 25% loading. Of course, the downside is that things are more unstable on a casual contract because if anything were to happen, you would usually be the first person to be let go as a casual staff. But beyond that, redundancies don't happen every day, yeah? Just as long as you're aware that that is something you could potentially face and you're prepared for it, I don't think it's that bad working on a casual contract. So that was it for me. I have also mentioned in passing in one of my videos, and some of you caught on to it, where I said that in that job, I was being paid close to $64 an hour. It was because of my 25% leave loading. And as I said, I was never in lack of shifts to do. In fact, it was the opposite. Sometimes when you've worked long enough on a casual contract with a particular employer, sometimes if you've been with them longer than 12 months, they can offer you a permanent casual position. So you're still a casual worker, but you're now you're on some kind of permanent arrangement, which means that there is a better guarantee that you will always have available shifts. However, like I said, there are some downsides. If anything happens, apart from redundancies, if you become sick or something happens at home that requires your attention for an extended period of time, it means you will not be getting paid in that time. Because I am going to talk about taxation in the next video, I am just going to leave this here, and this would be a connecting point to that video. The higher you earn, the more you're taxed. So yes, your question would be, does it mean that casual staff are taxed more than full-time staff? I will answer that in my next video, okay? So that is it. I will come your way again in the next video where I talk about taxation. Don't forget to like this video before you go, and if you haven't subscribed yet, this is another reminder for you to subscribe if you want to join the family, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.